You know, sometimes I forget that in a world where nobody gives a fuck about you, the only person you need room for is yourself. I keep all this shit around so that I could entertain and maybe have space for people or things for people to do whenever they come into my room. But I forgot that, like, this is all the shit that I like to do, and honestly, nobody gives a fuck about me enough to come hang out or talk to me or be interested in the shit that I like. So I should just move some stuff around, get rid of some shit, make some more room for myself. Better off that way anyway. Alone. Yeah. You know, I've kind of always been a state of myself type of person for real. Like, I never, like, really too much had to worry about catering to other people. It's probably a good quality of mine if I'd say anything. if anybody tried to talk to me. I need to start keeping my chat up. I never really know. I just always assume that I'm in here by myself for real. My phone.
Yeah, I should put this. I wish this damn thing wasn't so fucking wide. Could put it behind me like that. Yeah, it's probably good that way I don't look at it.
Keep my phone charged so I can go work after this. Alright, so, for the amount of 20s. wonder if it asks for it sequentially. I don't know. I'll figure it out. I'll have to work that out. Okay. Let's just try and type some of this out. I'm gonna switch this window over here for a second just so I can see it better. Nobody's talking to me on YouTube. You know, well, I don't know anybody in my class for real like that anyway, so like even if I'm not supposed to share project details anyway, so but whatever. I'm just working through it. Like it's not a crime for me to stream me working on some shit. If they take my answer, then that's plagiarism on their part. Okay. Plus I'm doing this late anyway. I should have did it yesterday, but I was just fucking tired. I worked. How am I supposed to work and do all this shit? Never mind. Let me not get on that. And then they want it to be exact. That's the thing about this shit. They want all of the output to be exact. Even if you have the right answer, you have to have all this shit in the correct format. Which is ass. I need 4 of these. See, the thing about this is, Kind of need to open up. I'll open up score. I just never know like the full syntax for scanf. I don't like to mess up. And then the ampersand that assigns. Let's see if we can have a print statement before the ampersand. They want you to print the number though. I'll test and see if you need to have it inside, but I don't know if you would. I want a keyboard so bad. I hate typing on a laptop keyboard. Stupid bug. I'm gonna go get some incense today. What are you looking at? You looking at me? Quit. Damn, I hate that noise, bro. Big dog. What up, Zach? Just doing some coding. Hey, actually, you know how to fucking do this shit. Can you help me out, bro? You probably know how to do this. Hold on. I'm about to pull this up, make it bigger so you can see. Watching. Okay, let me I'm gonna duplicate this. I'm at work right now, but I can when I get off. But when I get off, I can. What time do you get off? In C++. Hold on, I'm about to put my display capture up. $230. Oh, you never done C++? I mean, if you know how to do coding language, you could probably understand some of what I'm doing, I guess. Sensor on screen. Put this. You know how to do C hashtag. I don't know what the fuck that is. I mean, you probably could understand my coding like language. You know what I mean? Like you could probably like help me figure out how to syntax this. Maybe. I don't know. If anything, you could, like I could show it to you and then just translate it, but so I'm kind of getting stuck, or I'm about to get stuck, I feel like.
We're here at MMA Columbia, and we're bringing Big Mike back on the channel, and he's going to show you how to throw the perfect cross. So this is one of the most important...
Why did that just pop up? Oh, yeah, because I'm in this playlist. Hey, lay down. Go lay down. I'm working right now.
And once again, Balboa had to return to Darien. Pedrarius had, in any case, invited Balboa back to discuss a new plan, and on the outskirts of the settlement, the explorer was met by Francisco Pizarro, an old friend who had accompanied him on his first crossing of the isthmus. But this was a trap.
I could test this, I'm pretty sure.
Soldiers, Pizarro surrounded his former friend, arrested him, and returned him to Pedrarius, who tried him on charges of rebellion. A few days later, Balboa's head fell into a basket, along with those of his most trusted followers. Years later, Pizarro himself reached Peru, and Balboa's deeds were forgotten. Interpretation. Most men are ruled by the heart, not the head. Their plans are vague, and when they meet obstacles, they improvise. Improvisation will only bring you as far as the next crisis, and is never a substitute for thinking several steps ahead and planning to the end. Balboa had a dream of glory and wealth, and a vague plan to reach it. Yet his bold deeds and his discovery of the Pacific are largely forgotten, for he committed what in the world of power is the ultimate sin. He went part way, leaving the door open for others to take over. A real man of power would have had the prudence to see the dangers in the distance, the rivals who would want to share in the conquests, the vultures that would hover once they heard the word gold. Balboa should have kept his knowledge of the Incas secret until after he had conquered Peru. Only then would his wealth and his head have been secure. Once Pedrarius arrived on the scene, a man of power and prudence would have schemed to kill or imprison him, and to take over the army he had brought for the conquest of Peru.
Okay, so that didn't work.
Balboa was locked in the moment, always reacting emotionally, never thinking ahead. What good is it to have the greatest dream in the world if others reap the benefits and the glory? Never lose your head over a vague, open-ended dream. Plan to the end. Keys to power. Most people believe that they are, in fact, aware of the future, that they are planning and thinking ahead. They are usually deluded. What they are really doing is succumbing to their desires, to what they want the future to be. Their plans are vague, based on their imaginations, rather than their reality. They may believe they are thinking all the way to the end, but they are really only focusing on the happy ending and deluding themselves by the strength of their desire. The ending is everything. It is the end of the action that determines who gets the glory, the money, the prize. Your conclusion must be crystal clear, and you must keep it constantly in mind. You must also figure out how to ward off the vultures circling overhead, trying to live off the carcass of your creation. And you must anticipate the many possible crises that will tempt you to improvise. When you see several steps ahead and plan your moves all the way to the end, you will no longer be tempted by emotion or by the desire to improvise. Your clarity will rid you of the anxiety and vagueness that are the primary reasons why so many fail to conclude their actions successfully. You see the ending, and you tolerate no deviation. Law 30. Make your accomplishments seem effortless. Judgment. Your actions must seem natural and executed with ease. All the toil and practice that go into them, and also all the clever tricks, must be concealed. When you act effortlessly, as if you could do much more.
Maybe I should just end it. Maybe I should end it in the tab.
How hard you work. It only raises questions. Teach no one your tricks, or they will be used against you. Observance of the law. The great escape artist Harry Houdini once advertised his act as the impossible possible. And indeed, those who witnessed his dramatic escapes felt that what he did on stage contradicted common sense ideas of human capacity. Over the years, Houdini escaped from the chained carcass of an embalmed sea monster, a half-octopus, half-whale-like beast that had beached near Boston. He had himself sealed inside.
I wish this shit would stop popping up in my way.
Which he emerged without breaking the paper. He passed through brick walls. He wriggled free from straitjackets while dangling high in the air. He leaped from bridges into icy waters, his hands manacled and his legs in chains. He had himself submerged in glass cases full of water, hands padlocked, while the audience watched in amazement as he worked himself free, struggling for close to an hour, apparently without breathing. Each time, he seemed to court certain death, yet survived with superhuman aplomb. Meanwhile, he said nothing about his methods, gave no clues as to how he accomplished any of his tricks. He left his audiences and critics speculating, his power and reputation enhanced by their struggles with the inexplicable. Perhaps the most baffling trick of all was making a 10,000-pound elephant disappear before an audience's eyes, a feat he repeated on stage for over 19 weeks. No one has ever really explained how he did this. For in the auditorium where he performed the trick, there was simply nowhere for an elephant to hide. The effortlessness of Houdini's escapes led some to think he used occult forces, his superior psychic abilities giving him special control over his body. But a German escape artist named Clopini claimed to know Houdini's secret. He simply used elaborate gadgets. Clopini also claimed to have defeated Houdini in a handcuff challenge in Holland. Houdini did not mind all kinds of speculation floating around about his methods, but he would not tolerate an outright lie. And in 1902, he challenged Clopini to a handcuff duel. Clopini accepted. Through a spy, he found out the secret word to unlock a pair of French combination lock cuffs that Houdini liked to use. His plan was to choose these cuffs to escape from on stage. This would definitely debunk Houdini. His genius simply lay in his use of mechanical gadgets. On the night of the challenge, just as Clopini had planned, Houdini offered him a choice of cuffs, and he selected the ones with the combination lock. He was even able to disappear with them behind a screen to make a quick test, and re-emerged seconds later, confident of victory. Acting as if he had sensed fraud, Houdini refused to lock Clopini in the cuffs. The two men argued and began to fight, even wrestling with each other on stage. After a few minutes of this, an apparently angry, frustrated Houdini gave up and locked Clopini in the cuffs. For the next few minutes, Clopini strained to get free. Something was wrong. Minutes earlier, he had opened the cuffs behind the screen. Now, the same code no longer worked.
Using Visual Studio, yeah. I don't have to use this, but it's just the easiest thing for me to use for class, because I already had it set up on my computer.
The cuffs that Clopini himself had opened behind the screen with the word CLEFS, French for keys, now clicked open only with the word FRAUD. Clopini never figured out how Houdini had accomplished this uncanny feat. Interpretation. Although we do not know for certain how Houdini accomplished many of his most ingenious escapes, one thing is clear. It was not the occult, or any kind of magic that gave him his powers, but hard work and endless practice, all of which he carefully concealed from the world. Houdini never left anything to chance. Day and night, he studied the workings of locks, researched centuries-old sleight-of-hand tricks, pored over books on mechanics, whatever he could use. Every moment not spent researching, he spent working his body, keeping himself exceptionally limber, and learning how to control his muscles and his breathing. Early on, Houdini's career, an old Japanese performer whom he toured with taught him an ancient trick: how to swallow an ivory ball, then bring it back up. He practiced this endlessly with a small peeled potato tied to a string. Up and down, he would manipulate the potato with his throat muscles until they were strong enough to move it without the string. No one could check the inside of his throat, where he could conceal small tools to help him escape. Even so, Clapini was fundamentally wrong. It was not Houdini's tools, but his practice, work, and research that made his escapes possible. Clapini, in fact, was completely outwitted by Houdini, who set the whole thing up. He let his opponent
3, 1, 4, 15.
Then baited him into choosing those cuffs on stage. Then, during the two men's tussle, the dexterous Houdini was able to change the code to FRAUD. He had spent weeks practicing this trick, but the audience saw none of the sweat and toil behind the scenes. Nor was Houdini ever nervous.
Okay.
He induced nervousness in others. He deliberately dragged out the time it would take to escape as a way of heightening the drama and making the audience squirm.
Maybe I should put it.
From death, always graceful and easy.
Maybe I should put it.
Like a Superman.
Put the tab
As a person of
before.
You must research and practice endlessly before appearing in public, on stage, or anywhere else. Never expose the sweat and labor behind your pores. Some think such exposure will demonstrate their diligence and honesty, but it actually just makes them look weaker, as if anyone who practiced and worked at it could do what they had done, or as if they weren't really up to the job. Keep your effort and your tricks to yourself, and you seem to have the grace and the ease of a god. One never sees the source of a god's power revealed. One only sees its effects. Keys to power. In the Book of the Courtier, published in 1528, Baldassare Castiglione describes the highly elaborate and codified manners of the perfect court citizen. And yet, Castiglione explains the courtier must execute these gestures with what he calls
Let me try this.
sprezzatura, the capacity to make the difficult seem easy. He urges the courtier to practice in all things a certain nonchalance, which conceals all artistry and makes whatever one says or does seem uncontrived and effortless. We all admire the achievement of some unusual feat, but if it is accomplished naturally and gracefully, our admiration increases tenfold. Whereas to labor at what one is doing and to make bones over it shows an extreme lack of grace and causes everything, whatever it's worth, to be discounted. The idea of sprezzatura is relevant to all forms of power, for power depends vitally on appearances and the illusions you create. Your public actions are like artworks. They must have visual appeal, must create anticipation, even entertain. When you reveal the inner workings of your creation, you become just one more mortal among others. What is understandable is not awe-inspiring. We tell ourselves we could do as well if we had the money and time. Avoid the temptation of showing how clever.
You're pushing my pillow off the bed. Go lay down over there.
To conceal the
Go lay down.
mechanisms of your cleverness. There is
Go lay
another
down.
reason for concealing your shortcuts and tricks. When you let this information out, you give people ideas they can use against you. You lose the advantages of keeping silent. We tend to want the world to know what we have done. We want our vanity gratified by having our hard work and cleverness applauded. And we may even want sympathy for the hours it has taken to reach our point of artistry. Learn to control this propensity to blab, for its effect is often the opposite of what you expected. Remember, the more mystery surrounds your actions, the more awesome your power seems. You appear to be the only one who can do what you do. And the appearance of having an exclusive gift is immensely powerful. Finally, because you achieve your accomplishments with grace and ease, people believe that you can always do more, if you tried harder. This elicits not only admiration, but a touch of fear. Your powers are untapped. No one can fathom their limits.
Oh, my thing did update. But I have 71 followers now.
Control the options. Get others to
Bob.
play with the cards you
Oh wait,
deal.
where's the thing?
Judgment. The best deceptions are the ones that seem to give the other person a choice. Your victims feel
Chilling
they
and
are in
chatting.
control, but are actually your puppets.
Ugh.
Give people options that come out in your favor, whichever one they choose. Force them to make choices between the lesser of two evils, both of which serve your purpose. Put them on the horns of a dilemma. They are gored wherever they turn. Observance of the law. From early in his reign, Ivan IV, later known as Ivan the Terrible, had to confront an unpleasant reality. The country desperately needed reform, but he lacked the power to push it through. The greatest limit to his authority came from the boyars, the Russian princely class that dominated the country and terrorized the peasantry. In 1553, at the age of 23, Ivan fell ill. Lying in bed, nearing death, he asked the boyars to swear allegiance to his son as the new Tsar. Some hesitated, some even refused.
That's
Then
fine.
and there, Ivan saw he had
I
no
want
power
Bob's name up there.
over the boyars. He recovered from his illness, but he never forgot the lesson. The boyars were out to destroy him. And indeed, in the years to come, many of the most powerful of them
Alright, let's see
defected
what this-
to
how this
Russia's main
compiles.
enemies, Poland and Lithuania, where they plotted their return and the overthrow of the Tsar. Even one of Ivan's closest friends, Prince Andrei Krybsky, suddenly turned against him, defecting to
31415.
Lithuania in 1564 and becoming the strongest of Ivan's enemies.
Oh, I forgot I gotta
When
do this.
Krybsky began raising troops for an invasion, the royal dynasty seemed suddenly more precarious than ever. With emigre nobles fomenting
No,
invasion
that's
from the west,
wrong.
Tartars bearing down from the east, and the boyars stirring up trouble within the country, Russia's vast size made it a nightmare to defend. In whatever direction Ivan struck, he would leave himself vulnerable on the other side. Only if he had absolute power could he deal with this many-headed hydra, and he had no such power. Ivan brooded until the morning of December 3rd, 1560.
I wonder how it's gonna input it though.
The citizens of Moscow awoke to a strange sight. Hundreds of sleds.
If I
filled
need
the
to go back
square
and do
before
that,
the
I'll do
Kremlin,
that, but
loaded with the
this
Tsar's
format is fine
treasures
for
and
now.
with provisions for the entire court. They watched in disbelief as the Tsar and his court boarded the sleds and left town. Without explaining why, he established himself in a village south of Moscow. For an entire month, a kind of terror gripped the capital, for the Muscovites feared that Ivan had abandoned them to the bloodthirsty boyars. Shops closed up, and riotous mobs gathered daily. Finally, on January 3rd of 1565, a letter arrived from the Tsar, explaining that he could no longer bear the boyars' betrayals and had decided to abdicate once and for all. Read aloud in public, the letter had a startling effect. Merchants and commoners blamed the boyars for Ivan's decision and took to the streets, terrifying the nobility with their fury. Soon, a group of delegates representing the church, the princes, and the people made the journey to Ivan's village and begged the Tsar, in the name of the Holy Land of Russia, to return to the throne. Ivan listened, but would not change his mind. After days of hearing their pleas, however, he offered his subjects a choice. Either they grant him absolute powers to govern as he pleased, with no interference from the boyars, or they find a new leader. Faced with a choice between civil war and the acceptance of despotic power, almost every sector of Russian society opted for a strong Tsar, calling for Ivan's return to Moscow and the restoration of law and order. In February, with much celebration, Ivan returned to Moscow. The Russians could no longer complain if he behaved dictatorially. They had given him this power themselves. Interpretation. Withdrawal and disappearance are classic ways of controlling the options. You give people a sense of how things will fall apart without you, and you offer them a choice. I stay away and you suffer the consequences, or I return under circumstances that I dictate. In this method of controlling people's options, they choose the option that gives you power because the alternative is just too unpleasant. You force their hand, but indirectly, they seem to have a choice. Whenever people feel they have a choice, they walk into your trap that much more easily. Keys to power. Words like freedom, options, and choice evoke a power of possibility far beyond the reality of the benefits they entail. When examined closely,
Quarters,
the choices we
nickels,
have
dimes,
in the
pennies.
marketplace, in elections, in our jobs, tend to have noticeable limitations. They are often a matter of a choice simply between A and B, with the rest of the alphabet.
I'm gonna get rid of this one right here and see what it looks like.
As long as the faintest mirage of choice flickers
Without
on,
that.
we rarely focus on the missing options. We choose to believe that the game is fair and that we have our freedom. We prefer not to think too much about the depth of our liberty to choose. This supplies the clever and cunning with the perception. For people who are choosing between alternatives, find it hard to believe they are being manipulated or deceived. They cannot see that you are allowing them a small amount of free will in exchange for a much more powerful imposition of your own will. Setting up a narrow range of choices, then, should always be a part of your deceptions. There is a saying, if you can get the bird to walk into the cage on its own, it will sing that much more prettily. The following are among the most common forms of controlling the options. Color the choices. This was a favorite technique of Henry Kissinger. As President Nixon's Secretary of State, Kissinger considered himself better informed than his boss and believed that in most situations, he could make the best decision on his own. But if he tried to determine policy, he would offend, or perhaps enrage, a notoriously insecure man. So Kissinger would propose 3 or 4 choices of action for each situation, and would present them in such a way that the one he preferred always seemed the best solution compared to the others. Time after time, Nixon fell for the bait, never suspecting that he was moving where Kissinger pushed him. This is an excellent device to use on the insecure master. Force the resistor. This is a good technique to use on children and other willful people who enjoy doing the opposite of what you ask them to. Push them to choose what you want them to do by appearing to advocate the opposite. Alter the playing field. In the 1860s, John D. Rockefeller set out to create
so that all calculated right.
If he tried to buy up the smaller oil companies, they would figure out what he was doing and fight back. Instead, he began secretly buying up the railway companies that transported the oil. When he then attempted to take over a particular company and met with resistance, he reminded them of their dependence on the rails. Refusing them shipping or simply raising their fees could ruin their business. Rockefeller altered the playing field so that the only options the small oil producers had were the ones he gave them. In this tactic, your opponents know their hand is being forced, but it doesn't matter. The technique is effective against those who resist at all costs. The shrinking options. The late 19th century art dealer Ambrose Vollard perfected this technique. Customers would come to Vollard's shop to see some Cézannes. He would show 3 paintings, neglect to mention a price, and pretend to doze off. The visitors would have to leave without deciding. They would usually come back the next day to see the paintings again, but this time, Vollard would pull out less interesting works, pretending he thought they were the same ones. The baffled customers would look at the new offerings, leave to think them over, and return yet again. Once again, the same thing would happen. Volar would show paintings of lesser quality still. Finally, the buyers would realize they had better grab what he was showing them, because tomorrow they would have to settle for something worse, perhaps at even higher prices. A variation on this technique is to raise the price every time the buyer hesitates and another day goes by. This is an excellent negotiating ploy to use on the chronically indecisive, who will fall for the idea that they are getting a better deal today than if they wait till tomorrow. The weak man on the precipice. The weak are the easiest to maneuver by controlling their options. Cardinal de Retz, the great 17th century provocateur, served as an unofficial assistant to the Duke of Orleans, who was notoriously indecisive. It was a constant struggle to convince the Duke to take action. He would hem and haw, weigh the options, and wait until the last moment, giving everyone around him an ulcer. But Retz discovered a way to handle them. He would describe all sorts of dangers, exaggerating them as much as possible, until the Duke saw a yawning abyss in every direction except one. The one Retz was pushing him to take. This tactic is similar to color the choices, but with the weak, you have to be more aggressive. Work on their emotions, use fear and terror to propel them into action. Try reason, and they will always find a way to procrastinate. The horns of a dilemma. This idea was demonstrated by General William Sherman's infamous march through Georgia during the American Civil War. Although the Confederates knew what direction Sherman was heading in, they never knew if he would attack from the left or the right, for he divided his army into two wings, and if the rebels retreated from one wing, they found themselves facing the other. This is a classic trial lawyer's technique. The lawyer leads the witness to decide between two possible explanations of an event, both of which poke a hole in their story. They have to answer the lawyer's questions, but whatever they say, they hurt themselves. The key to this move is to strike quickly, deny the victim the time to think of an escape. As they wriggle between the horns of the dilemma, they dig their own grave. Understand, in your struggles with your rivals, it will often be necessary for you to hurt them. And if you are clearly the agent of their punishment, expect a counterattack. Expect revenge. If, however, they seem to themselves to be the agents of their own misfortune, they will submit quietly. When Ivan left Moscow for his rural village, the citizens asking him to return agreed to his demand for absolute power. Over the years to come, they resented him less for the terror he unleashed on the country, because, after all, they had granted him his power themselves. This is why it is always good to allow your victims their choice of poison, and to cloak your involvement in providing it to them as far as possible. Law 32. Play to people's fantasies. Judgment. The truth is often avoided because it is ugly and unpleasant. Never appeal to truth and reality unless you are prepared for the anger that comes from disenchantment. Life is so harsh and distressing that people who can manufacture romance or conjure up fantasy are like oases in the desert. Everyone flocks to them. There is great power in tapping into the fantasies of the masses. Observance of the law. The city-state of Venice was prosperous for so long that its citizens felt their small republic had destiny on its side. In the Middle Ages and High Renaissance, its virtual monopoly on trade to the east made it the wealthiest city in Europe. Under a beneficent republican government, Venetians enjoyed liberties that few other Italians had ever known. Yet, in the 16th century, their fortunes suddenly changed. The opening of the New World transferred power to the Atlantic side of Europe, to the Spanish and Portuguese, and later the Dutch and English. Venice could not compete economically, and its empire gradually dwindled. The final blow was the devastating loss of a prized Mediterranean possession, the island of Cyprus, captured from Venice by the Turks in 1570. Now, noble families went broke in Venice, and banks began to fold. A kind of gloom and desperation settled over the citizens. They had known a glittering past, had either lived through it or heard stories about it from their elders. The closeness of the glory years was humiliating. The Venetians half believed that the goddess Fortune was only playing a joke on them, and that the old days would soon return. For the time being, though, what could they do? In 1589, rumors began to swirl around Venice of the arrival not far away of a mysterious man called Il Bragadino, a master of alchemy, a man who had won incredible wealth through his ability, it was said, to multiply gold through the use of a secret substance. The rumors spread quickly because a few years earlier, a Venetian nobleman passing through Poland had heard a learned man prophesy that Venice would recover her past glory and power if she could find a man who understood
Number
the
20 plus
alchemic
number
art
10.
of manufacturing gold. And so, as word reached Venice of the gold this Bragadino possessed, he clanked gold coins continuously in his hands, and golden objects filled his palace. Some began to dream. Through him, their city would prosper again. Members of Venice's most important noble families accordingly went together to Brescia, where Bragadino lived. They toured his palace and watched in awe as he demonstrated his gold-making abilities, taking a pinch of seemingly worthless minerals and transforming it into several ounces of gold dust. The Venetian Senate prepared to debate the idea of extending an official invitation to Bragadino to stay in Venice at the city's expense, when word suddenly reached them that they were competing with the Duke of Mantua for his services. They heard of a magnificent party in Bragadino's palace for the Duke, featuring garments with golden buttons, gold watches, gold plates, and on and on. Worried they might lose Bragadino to Mantua, the Senate voted almost unanimously to invite him to Venice, promising him a mountain of money he would need to continue living in his luxurious style, but only if he came right away. Late that year, the mysterious Bragadino arrived in Venice. With his piercing dark eyes under thick brows, and the two enormous black mastiffs that accompanied him everywhere, he was forbidding and impressive. He took up residence in a sumptuous palace on the island of Giudecca, with the Republic funding his banquets, his expensive clothes, and all his other whims. A kind of alchemy fever spread through Venice. On street corners, hawkers would sell coal, distilling apparatus, bellows, how-to books on the subject. Everyone began to practice alchemy, everyone except Bragadino. The alchemist seemed to be in no hurry to begin manufacturing the gold that would save Venice from ruin. Strangely enough, this only increased his popularity and following. People thronged from all over Europe, even Asia, to meet this remarkable man. Months went by, with gifts pouring into Bragadino from all sides. Still, he gave no sign of the miracle that the Venetians confidently expected.
Okay, I think I know how to do this. Okay.
Eventually, the citizens began to grow impatient, wondering if he would wait forever. At first, the senators warned them not to hurry him. He was a capricious devil who needed to be cajoled. Finally, though, the nobility began to wonder too, and the Senate came under pressure to show a return on the city's ballooning investment. Bragadino had only scorn for the doubters, but he responded to them. He had, he said, already deposited in the city's mint the mysterious substance with which he multiplied gold. He could use this substance up all at once and produce double the gold, but the more slowly the process took place, the more it would yield. If left alone for 7 years, sealed in a casket. The substance would multiply the gold in the mint 30 times over. Most of the senators agreed to wait to reap the gold mine Bragadino promised. Others, however, were angry. 7 more years of this man living royally at the public trough? And many of the common citizens of Venice echoed these sentiments. Finally, the alchemist's enemies demanded he produce a proof of his skills, a substantial amount of gold, and soon. Lofty, apparently devoted to his art, Bragadino responded that Venice, in its impatience, had betrayed him and would therefore lose his services. He left town, going first to nearby Padua, then, in 1590, to Munich, at the invitation of the Duke of Bavaria, who, like the entire city of Venice, had known great wealth but had fallen into bankruptcy through his own profligacy, and hoped to regain his fortune through the famous alchemist's services. And so, Bragadino resumed the comfortable arrangement he had known in Venice, and the same pattern repeated itself. Interpretation. The young Cypriot Mammunia had lived in Venice for several years before reincarnating himself as the alchemist Bragadino. He saw how gloom had settled on the city, how everyone was hoping for a redemption from some indefinite source. At first, Mammunia did not use vulgar demonstrations to convince people of his alchemic skill. His sumptuous palace, his opulent garments, the clink of gold in his hands, all these provided a superior argument to anything rational, and these established the cycle that kept him going. His obvious wealth confirmed his reputation as an alchemist, so that patrons like the Duke of Mantua gave him money, which allowed him to live in wealth, which reinforced his reputation as an alchemist, and so on. Only once this reputation was established, and dukes and senators were fighting over him, did he resort to the trifling necessity of a demonstration. By then, however, people were easy to deceive. They wanted to believe. The Venetian senators who watched him multiply gold wanted to believe so badly that they failed to notice the glass pipe up his sleeve from which he slipped gold dust into his pinches of minerals. Brilliant and capricious, he was the alchemist of their fantasies, and once he had created an aura like this, no one noticed his simple deceptions. People rarely believe that their problems arise from their own misdeeds and stupidity. Someone or something out there is to blame. The other, the world, the gods. And so, salvation comes from the outside as well. Had Bragadino arrived in Venice armed with a detailed analysis of the reasons behind the city's economic decline, and of the hard-nosed steps that it could take to turn things around, he would have been scorned. The reality was too ugly, and the solution too painful. Mostly the kind of hard work that the citizens' ancestors had mustered to create an empire. Fantasy, on the other hand, in this case the romance of alchemy, was easy to understand and infinitely more palatable. To gain power, you must be a source of pleasure for those around you, and pleasure comes from playing to people's fantasies. Never promise a gradual improvement through hard work. Rather, promise the moon, the great and sudden transformation, the pot of gold. Keys to power. Fantasy can never operate alone. It requires the backdrop of the humdrum and the mundane. It is the oppressiveness of reality that allows fantasy to
Okay,
take
so
root
if you want
and
the
bloom.
remainder,
In
after
16th
dividing
century
by,
Venice, the reality was one of decline and loss
you
of
want the
prestige.
remainder after dividing by
The
10.
corresponding fantasy described a sudden
write this down.
recovery of past glories through the miracle.
Let's say I
of
have
While the reality only got worse, the
1,080.
Venetians inhabited a happy dream world in which their city restored its fabulous wealth and
1,080
power
cents.
overnight, turning dust into gold.
If I just
The
want the
person who
80,
can spin a fantasy out of an oppressive reality has access to untold power. As you search for the fantasy that will take hold of the masses, then, keep your eye on the banal truths that weigh heavily on us all. Never be distracted by people's glamorous portraits of themselves and their lives. Search and dig for what really imprisons them. Once you find that, you have the magical key that will put great power in your hands. Remember, the key to fantasy is distance. The distant has a lure and promise, seems simple and problem-free. What are you offering then should be ungraspable. Never let it become oppressively familiar. It is the mirage in the distance, withdrawing as the sucker approaches. Never be too direct in describing the fantasy. Keep it vague. As a forger of fantasies, let your victim come close enough to see and be tempted, but keep him far away enough that he stays dreaming and desiring. Law 33. Discover each man's thumb screw.
Maybe that's true.
Judgment. Everyone has a weakness, a gap in the castle wall. That weakness is usually an insecurity, an uncontrollable need.
What the hell?
It can also be a small secret pleasure. Either way, once found, it is a thumb screw you can turn to your advantage. Finding the thumb screw, a strategic plan of action. We all have resistances. We live with a perpetual armor around ourselves to defend against change and the intrusive actions of friends and rivals. We would like nothing more than to be left to do things our own way. Constantly butting up against these resistances will cost you a lot of energy. One of the most important things to realize about people, though, is that they all have a weakness, some part of their psychological armor that will not resist, that will bend to your will if you find it and push on it. Some people wear their weaknesses openly, others disguise them. Those who disguise them are often the ones most effectively undone through that one shake in their armor. In planning your assault, keep these principles in mind.
I have some notes written down somewhere about getting something from a certain place.
As Sigmund Freud remarked, no mortal can keep a secret. If his lips are silent, he chatters with his fingertips. Betrayal oozes out of him at every pore. This is a critical concept in the search for a person's weakness. It is revealed by seemingly unimportant gestures and passing words. The key is not only what you look for, but where and how you look. Everyday conversation supplies the richest mine of weaknesses, so train yourself to listen. Start by always seeming interested. The appearance of a sympathetic ear will spur anyone to talk. A clever trick, often used by the 19th century French statesman Talleyrand, is to appear to open up to the other person, to share a secret with them. It can be completely made up, or it can be real, but of no great importance to you. The important thing is that it should seem to come from the heart. This will usually elicit a response that is not only as frank as yours,
Okay,
but more
so
genuine.
let's do
A response that
percent 10.
reveals a weakness. If you suspect that someone has a particular soft spot, probe for it indirectly. If, for instance, you sense that a man has a need to be loved, openly flatter him. If you lapse off your compliments, no matter how obvious, you are on the right track. Train your eye for details, how someone tips a waiter, what delights a person, the hidden messages in clothes. Find people's idols, the things they worship and will do anything to get. Perhaps you can be the supplier of their fantasies. Find the helpless child. Most weaknesses begin in childhood, before the self builds up compensatory defenses. Perhaps the child was pampered or indulged in a particular area, or perhaps a certain emotional need went unfulfilled. As he or she grows older, the indulgence or the deficiency may be buried, but never disappears. Knowing about a childhood need gives you a powerful key to a person's weakness. One sign of this weakness is that when you touch on it, the person will often act like a child. Be on the lookout, then, for any behavior that should have been outgrown. If your victims or rivals went without something important, such as parental support when they were children, supply it, or its facsimile. If they reveal a secret taste, a hidden indulgence, indulge it. In either case, they will be unable to resist you. Look for contrasts. An overt trait often conceals its opposite. People who thump their chests are often big cowards. A prudish exterior may hide a lascivious soul. The uptight are often screaming for adventure. The shy are dying for attention. By probing beyond appearances, you will often find people's weaknesses in the opposite of the qualities they reveal to you. Find the weak link. Sometimes in your search for weaknesses, it is not what, but who that matters. In today's versions of the court, there is often someone behind the scenes who has a great deal of power, a tremendous influence over the person superficially on top. These behind-the-scenes power brokers are the group's weak link. Win their favor, and you indirectly influence the king. Alternatively, even in a group of people acting with the appearance of one will, as when a group under attack closes ranks to resist an outsider, there is always a weak link in the chain. Find the one person who will bend under pressure. Fill the void. The two main emotional voids to fill are insecurity and unhappiness. The insecure are suckers for any kind of social validation. As for the chronically unhappy, look for the roots of their unhappiness. The insecure and the unhappy are the people least able to disguise their weaknesses. The ability to fill their emotional voids is a great source of power and an indefinitely prolongable one. Feed on uncontrollable emotions. The uncontrollable emotion can be a paranoid fear, a fear disproportionate to the situation, or any base motive such as lust, greed, vanity, or hatred. People in the grip of these emotions often cannot control themselves, and you can do the controlling for them. Observance of the law. Arabella Huntington, wife of the great late 19th century railroad magnate Collis P. Huntington, came from humble origins and always struggled for social recognition among her wealthy peers. When she gave a party in her San Francisco mansion, few of the social elite would show up. Most of them took her for a gold digger, not their kind. Because of her husband's fabulous wealth, art dealers courted her, but with such condescension, they obviously saw her as an upstart. Only one man of consequence treated her differently, the dealer Joseph Duveen. For the first few years of Duveen's relationship with Arabella, he made no effort to sell expensive art to her. Instead, he accompanied her to fine stores, chatted endlessly about queens and princesses he knew, on and on. At last, she thought a man who treated her as an equal, even a superior, in high society. Meanwhile, if Duveen did not try to sell art to her, he did subtly educate her in his aesthetic ideas, namely, that the best art was the most expensive. And after Arabella had soaked up his way of seeing things, Duveen would act as if she always had exquisite taste, even though before she met him, her aesthetics had been abysmal. When Collis Huntington died in 1900, Arabella came into a fortune. She suddenly started to buy expensive paintings by Rembrandt and Velázquez, for example, and only from Duveen. Years later, Duveen sold her Gainsborough's Blue Boy for the highest price ever paid for a work of art at the time, an astounding purchase for a family that previously had shown little interest in collecting. Interpretation. Joseph Duveen instantly understood Arabella Huntington and what made her tick. She wanted to feel important, at home in society. Intensely insecure about her lower class background, she needed confirmation of her new social status. Duveen waited. Instead of rushing into trying to persuade her to collect art, he suddenly went to work.
It's 12. I've pretty much gotten this done. I just need to do a couple more things to it. I'm pretty sure. I'm gonna try and compile this one more time. See what kind of values it's giving me.
Duveen never condescended to Arabella. Rather than lecturing to her, he instilled his ideas in her indirectly. The result was one of his best and most devoted clients, and also the sale of the Blue Boy. People's need for validation and recognition, their need to feel important, is the best kind of weakness to exploit. First, it is almost universal. Second, exploiting it is so very easy. All you have to do is find ways to make people feel better about their taste, their social standing, their intelligence. Once the fish are hooked, you can reel them in again and again for years. You are filling a positive role, giving them what they cannot get on their own.
Yo,
they may never suspect.
I don't know how that works, but it does. I don't know how that works, but it does. Okay, shit.
About themselves, and that is worth any price. Law 34. Be royal in your own fashion. Act like a king to be treated.
Okay, so dollars total.
Judgment. The way you carry yourself will often determine how you are treated. In the long run, appearing vulgar or common will make people disrespect you. For a king respects himself and inspires the same sentiment in others. By acting regally and confident of your powers, you make yourself seem destined to wear a crown. Observance of the law. When Christopher Columbus was trying to find funding for his legendary voyages, many around him believed he came from the Italian aristocracy. This view was passed into history through a biography written after the explorer's death by his son, which describes him as a descendant of a Count Colombo of the castle of Cuccaro in Montferrat. Colombo, in turn, was said to be descended from the legendary Roman general Colonius, and two of his first cousins were supposedly direct descendants of an emperor of Constantinople. An illustrious background indeed, but it was nothing more than illustrious fantasy, for Columbus was actually the son of Domenico Colombo, a humble weaver who had opened a wine shop when Christopher was a young man, and who then made his living by selling cheese. Columbus himself had created the myth of his noble background, because from early on he felt that destiny had singled him out for great things, and that he had a kind of royalty in his blood. Accordingly, he acted as if he were indeed descended from noble stock. After an uneventful career as a merchant on a commercial vessel, Columbus, originally from Genoa, settled in Lisbon. Using the fabricated story of his noble background, he married into an established Lisbon family that had excellent connections with Portuguese royalty. Through his in-laws, Columbus finagled a meeting with the King of Portugal, João II, whom he petitioned to finance a westward voyage aimed at discovering a shorter route to Asia. In return for announcing that any discoveries he achieved would be made in the king's name, Columbus wanted a series of rights.
555 divided by 100
of the Ocean Sea, the office of Viceroy over any lands he found, and
the
10%
remainder of that
of the
would be
future
55.
commerce with such lands. All of these were to be hereditary and for all time.
Okay.
Columbus made these demands.
So this would be divided by 100.
Previously been a mere merchant.
Divided
He
by
knew
100.
almost nothing about navigation. He could not work a quadrant, and he had never led a group of men. In short, he had absolutely no qualifications for the
Before I
journey he
do
proposed.
this,
Furthermore, his petition included no details as to how he would accomplish his plans, just vague promises. When Columbus finished his pitch, João II smiled. He politely declined the offer, but left the door open for the future. Here, Columbus must have noticed something he would never forget. Even as the king turned down the sailors' demands, he treated them as legitimate. He neither laughed at Columbus nor questioned his background and credentials. In fact, the king was impressed by the boldness of Columbus's requests and clearly felt comfortable in the company of a man who acted so confidently. The meeting must have convinced Columbus that his instincts were correct. By asking for the moon, he had instantly raised his own status. For the king assumed that unless a man who set such a high price on himself were mad, which Columbus did not appear to be, he must somehow be worth it. A few years later, Columbus moved to Spain. Using his Portuguese connections, he moved in elevated circles at the Spanish court, receiving subsidies from illustrious financiers and sharing tables with dukes and princes. To all these men, he repeated his request for financing for a voyage to the west, and then for the rights he had demanded from Joel II. Some, such as the powerful Duke of Medina, wanted to help, but could not, since they lacked the power to grant him the titles and rights he wanted. But Columbus would not back down. He soon realized that only one person could meet his demands: Queen Isabella. In 1487, he finally managed a meeting with the Queen, and although he could not convince her to finance the voyage, he completely charmed her and became a frequent guest in the palace. In 1492, the Spanish finally expelled the Moorish invaders who centuries earlier had seized parts of the country. With the wartime burden on her treasury lifted, Isabella felt she could finally respond to the demands of her explorer friend, and she decided to pay for 3 ships, equipment,
do this again.
The cruise, and a modest stipend for Columbus.
/A.
She had a contract drawn up that granted Columbus the titles and rights on which he had insisted. The only one she denied, and only in the contract's fine print, was the 10% of all revenues from any lands discovered, an absurd demand, since he wanted no time limit on it. Had the clause been left in, it would eventually have made Columbus and his heirs the wealthiest family on the planet.
In a second. Just give me a second. I almost have this done. 20s.
Satisfied that his demands had been met, Columbus set sail that same year.
Let's say we have 720s.
Before he left, he was careful to hire the best navigator he could find to help get him there.
3 5 5s.
Yet, when Columbus petitioned the Queen to finance an even more ambitious voyage the following year, she agreed. By then, she had come to see
16
Columbus
quarters,
as destined for great
22 dimes,
interpretation.
18 nickels,
Columbus had an amazing
and 7 pennies.
to charm the nobility, and it all came from the way he carried himself. He projected a sense of confidence that was completely out of proportion to his means. Nor was his confidence the aggressive, ugly self-promotion of an upstart. It was a quiet and calm self-assurance. In fact, it was the same confidence usually shown by the nobility themselves. The powerful in the old-style aristocracies felt no need to prove or assert themselves. Being noble, they knew they always deserved more, and asked for it. With Columbus, then, they felt an instant affinity, for he carried himself just the way they did, elevated above the crowd, destined for greatness. Understand,
I don't think that makes
your
sense.
Power to set your own price. How you carry yourself reflects.
Let's see how it was before.
If you ask for little, shuffle
5
your feet
pennies.
and lower your head, people will assume this reflects your character. But this behavior is not you.
5 plus
It is
5.
only how you have chosen to present yourself to other people. You can just as easily present the Columbus front: buoyancy, confidence, and the feeling that you were born to wear a crown. Keys to power. As children, we start our lives with great exuberance, expecting and demanding everything from the world. This generally carries over into our first forays into society, as we begin our careers. But as we grow older, the rebuffs and failures we experience set up boundaries that only get firmer with time. Coming to expect less
quarters
of the world,
times
we
25
accept
dimes
limitations that are really
times 10.
self-imposed. We start to bow and scrape and apologize for even the simplest of requests. The solution to such a shrinking of horizons is to deliberately force ourselves in the opposite direction, to downplay the failures and ignore the limitations, to make ourselves demand and expect as much as the child. To accomplish this, we must use a particular strategy upon ourselves. Call it the strategy of the crown. The strategy of the crown is based on a simple chain of cause and effect. If we believe we are destined for great things, our belief will radiate outward just as a crown creates an aura around a king. This outward radiance will infect the people around us, who will think we must have reasons to feel so confident. People who wear crowns seem to feel no inner sense of the limits to what they can ask for or what they can accomplish. This too radiates outward. Limits and boundaries disappear. Use the strategy of the crown, and you will be surprised how often it bears fruit. Take as an example those happy children who ask for whatever they want and get it.
I don't know how I got that before, so I guess it would be...
Adults enjoy granting their wishes, just as Isabella enjoyed granting the wishes
Let's do
of Columbus.
percent 10 and then
Law 35.
divided by
Master
10.
the art of timing. Judgment. Never seem to be in a hurry. Hurrying betrays a lack of control over yourself and over time. Always seem patient, as if you know that everything will come to you eventually. Become a detective of the right moment. Sniff out the spirit of the times, the trends that will carry you to power. Learn to stand back when the time is not yet ripe, and to strike fiercely when it has reached fruition. Observance of the law. Starting out in life
Let's
as
see
a
what this
nondescript
does.
French seminary school teacher, Joseph Fouché wandered from town to town for most of the decade of the 1780s, teaching mathematics to young boys. Yet, he never completely committed himself to the church, never took his vows as a priest. He had bigger plans. Patiently waiting for his chance, he kept his options open. And when the French Revolution broke out in 1789, Fouché waited no longer. He got rid of his cassock, grew his hair long, and became a revolutionary. For this was the spirit of the times. To miss the boat at this critical moment could have spelt disaster. Fouché did not miss the boat. Befriending the revolutionary leader Robespierre, he quickly rose in the rebel ranks. In 1792, the town of Nantes elected Fouché to be its representative to the National Convention, created that year to frame a new constitution for a French republic. When Fouché arrived in Paris to take his seat at the convention, a violent rift had broken out between the moderates and the radical Jacobins. Fouché sensed that in the long run, neither side would emerge victorious. Power rarely ends up in the hands of those who start a revolution, or even of those who further it. Power sticks to those who bring it to a conclusion.
Okay,
That
so if I
was
want to
the
get,
side Fouché
so
wanted
let's
to
say I
be
have
on.
555
His sense of
cents.
timing was
I wanna get-
uncanny. He started as a moderate, for moderates were in the majority.
The cents
When the
place.
time came to decide on whether or not to execute Louis XVI, however, he saw that the people were clamoring for the king's head. So, he cast the deciding vote for the guillotine. Now, he had become a radical. Yet, as tensions came to the boil in Paris, he foresaw the danger of being too closely associated with any one faction. So he accepted a position in the provinces where he could lay low for a while. A few months later, he was assigned to the post of proconsul in Lyon, where he oversaw the execution of dozens of aristocrats. At a certain moment, however, He called a halt to the killings, sensing that the mood of the country was turning. And despite the blood already on his hands, the citizens of Lyon hailed him as a savior from what had become known as the Terror. So far, Fouché had played his cards brilliantly, but in 1794, his old friend Robespierre recalled him to Paris to account for his actions in Lyon. Robespierre had been the driving force behind the Terror. He had sent heads on both the right and the left, rolling, and Fouché, whom he no longer trusted, seemed destined to provide the next head. Over the next few weeks, a tense struggle ensued, while Robespierre railed openly against Fouché, accusing him of dangerous ambitions and calling for his arrest. The crafty Fouché worked more indirectly, quietly gaining support among those who were beginning to tire of Robespierre's dictatorial control. Fouché was playing for time. He knew that the longer he survived, the more disaffected citizens he could rally against Robespierre. He had to have broad support before he moved against the powerful leader. He rallied support among both the moderates and the Jacobins, playing on the widespread fear of Robespierre. Everyone was afraid of being the next to go to the guillotine. It all came to fruition on July 27th. The convention turned against Robespierre, shouting down his usual lengthy speech. He was quickly arrested, and a few days later it was Robespierre's head, not Fouché's, that fell into the basket. When Fouché returned to the convention after Robespierre's death, he played his most unexpected move. Having led the conspiracy against Robespierre, he was expected to sit with the moderates. But, lo and behold, he once again changed sides, joining the radical Jacobins. For perhaps the first time in his life, he aligned himself with the minority. Clearly, he sensed a reaction stirring. He knew that the moderate faction that had executed Robespierre and was now about to take power would initiate a new round of the Terror, this time against the radicals. In siding with the Jacobins, then, Fouché was sitting with the martyrs of the days to come, the people who would be considered blameless in the troubles that were on their way. Taking sides with what was about to become the losing team was a risky gamble, of course, but Fouché must have calculated he could keep his head long enough to quietly stir up the populace against the moderates and watch them fall from power. And indeed, although the moderates did call for his arrest in December of 1795 and would have sent him to the guillotine, too much time had passed. The executions had become unpopular with the people, and Fouché survived the swing of the pendulum one more time.
Locked in. Yeah, I am locked in. Trying to figure out how to do this shit, bro.
A Jacobin government, but a moderate one. More moderate than the government that had reimposed the Terror. Fouché, the radical, had kept his head, but now he had to keep a low profile. He waited patiently on the sidelines for several years, allowing time to soften any bitter feelings against him. Then he approached the Directoire and convinced them he had a new passion: intelligence gathering. He became a paid spy for the government, excelled at the job, and in 1799 was rewarded by being made Minister of Police. Now he was not just empowered, but required to extend his spying to every corner of France, a responsibility that would greatly reinforce his natural ability to sniff out where the wind was blowing. One of the first social trends he detected, in fact, came in the person of Napoleon, a brash young general whose destiny he right away saw was entwined with the future of France. When Napoleon unleashed a coup d'etat on November 9th, 1799, Fouché pretended to be asleep. Indeed, he slept the whole day. For this indirect assistance, it might have been thought his job, after all, to prevent a military coup. Napoleon kept him on as Minister of Police in the new regime. Over the next few years, Napoleon came to rely on Fouché more and more. He even gave this former revolutionary a title, Duke of Otranto, and rewarded him with great wealth. By 1808, however, Fouché, always attuned to the times, sensed that Napoleon was on the downswing. His feudal war with Spain, a country that posed no threat to France, was a sign that he was losing a sense of proportion. Never one to be caught on a sinking ship, Fouché conspired with Talleyrand to bring about Napoleon's downfall. Although the conspiracy failed, Talleyrand was fired. Fouché stayed, but was kept on a tight leash. It publicized a growing discontent with the emperor, who seemed to be losing control. By 1814, Napoleon's power had crumbled, and Allied forces finally conquered him. The next government was a restoration of
Alright,
monarchy.
let's see if
King Louis XVIII,
this
brother of Louis
compiles
XVI.
correctly.
Fouché,
And this will be my last
his nose
attempt
always sniffing the air
for right now.
for the next social shift, knew Louis would not last long. He had none of Napoleon's flair. Fouché once again,
because the only thing I need to get right after this is the length and then the syntax right. But I don't know how to, I'm not sure how to do those parts, so I'm gonna ask for help for that.
Louis XVIII panicked. His policies had alienated the citizenry who were clamoring for Napoleon's return. So Louis turned to the one man who could maybe have saved his hide. Fouché, the former radical who had sent his brother Louis XVI to the guillotine, but was now one of the most popular and widely admired politicians in France. Fouché, however, would not
$993.67. Okay, wait a minute. That may be right. That may be right. The right answer. Okay, but I don't know how this is supposed to be compiling. Because I don't know how, like, the... In these...
Napoleon
Fuck.
and his new citizen army were closing in on Paris. Seeing his reign
There's like a
about to
little tab
collapse,
here,
feeling that
but I don't know
Fouché
how to get
betrayed
that
him,
tab,
and certain that
because
he
I
did not
can't
want
tell
this powerful
what it's
and
like.
evil man on Napoleon's team, King Louis ordered the minister's arrest and execution. On March 16,
The length of your money is
1815,
roughly 256
policemen
inches.
surrounded
And I need to figure out,
Fouché's
okay,
coach
well,
on
I'm
the
pretty sure, I'm
battlefield.
pretty much done with the project.
Was this
Anyway.
finally his end?
So,
Perhaps, but not immediately.
I just need to do,
Fouché told the police that an ex-member of government could not be arrested on the street.
let me go ahead and add this print statement in.
And allowed him to return home. Later that
Print
day,
F.
they came to his house and once again declared him under arrest. Fouché
The
nodded,
length of your
but
money
would the officers
is
be
roughly...
so kind as allow a gentleman to wash at the
Ah,
change
shit, I'm gonna have to round.
for the last time. They gave their permission. Fouché left the room, and the minutes
Oh, God.
went by.
Accidentally press
Fouché
control.
would not return. Finally, the policeman went into the next room, where they saw a ladder against an open window leading down to the garden below.
Am I going to the game? Nah, I don't usually go to the games. I don't have friends, and I don't have money to buy game tickets for the game.
And the king and all the king's men had to flee the city. As soon as Napoleon entered Paris, Fouché came out of hiding. He had cheated the executioner once again. Napoleon greeted his former minister of police and gladly restored him to his old post. During the 100 days that Napoleon remained in power, until Waterloo, it was essentially Fouché who governed France. After Napoleon fell, Louis XVIII returned to the throne, and like a cat with 9 lives,
Who is this, by the way? Is it
yet another government. By then,
may be tripping,
his
but
power
is
and
it,
influence had grown so great that not
Curtis
even a king dared
from math class?
Interpretation. In a period
I
of
didn't- for sure I'm
unprecedented
taking-
turmoil, Joseph Fouché thrived through his mastery of the art of timing. He teaches us a number of key lessons. First, it is critical to recognize the spirit of the times. Fouché always looked
Roughly
2
blah blah
steps
blah
ahead,
inches.
down the wave that would
Then
carry
you put a
him to
period
power,
after that.
and rode it.
They'll get you for
He
they'll
must
get you for
always
anything.
work with
I
the
swear to God,
times,
they'll fucking don't put a
anticipate
period
the
on that shit.
twists and turns, and
They'll be
never
like,
miss
"Oops,
the
you got the
marks.
problem wrong."
Sometimes the spirit of the times is obscure.
And then this will be
Recognize it not by what is loudest and most obvious in it, but by what lies hidden and dormant.
bill size,
Look
coin
forward to the
size.
Napoleons of the future rather than holding on to the ruins of the past. Second, recognizing the prevailing winds does not necessarily mean running with them. Any potent social movement creates a powerful reaction, and it is wise to anticipate what that reaction will be, as Fouché did after the execution of Robespierre. Rather than ride the cresting wave of the moment, wait for the tide's ebb to carry you back to power. Upon occasion, bet on the reaction that is brewing and place yourself in the vanguard of it. Finally, Fouché had remarkable patience. Without patience as your sword and shield, your timing will fail and you will inevitably find yourself a loser. When the times were against Fouché, he did not struggle, get emotional, or strike out rashly. He kept his cool and maintained a low profile, patiently building support among the citizenry, the bulwark in his next rise to power. Whenever he found himself in the weaker position, he played for time, which he knew would always be his ally if he was patient. Recognize the moment then, to hide in the grass or slither under a rock, as well as the moment to bare your fangs and attack. Keys to power. There are three kinds of time for us to deal with. Each presents problems that can be solved with skill and patience. First, there is long time, the drawn-out, years-long kind of time that must be managed with patience and gentle guidance. Our handling of long time should be mostly defensive. This is the art of not reacting impulsively, of waiting for opportunity. Next, there is forced time, the short time that we can manipulate as an offensive weapon, upsetting the timing of our opponent. Finally, there is end time, when a plan must be executed with speed and force. We have waited, found the moment, and must not hesitate. Long time. When you force the pace out of fear and impatience, you create a nest of problems that require fixing, and you end up taking much longer than if you had taken your time. Hurriers may occasionally get there quicker, but papers fly everywhere, new dangers arise, and they find themselves in constant crisis mode, fixing the problems that they themselves have created. Sometimes, not acting in the face of danger is your best move. You wait. You deliberately slow down. As time passes, it will eventually present opportunities you had not imagined. Waiting involves controlling not only your own emotions, but those of your colleagues who, mistaking action for power, may try to push you into making rash moves. In your rivals, on the other hand, you can encourage this same mistake if you let them rush headlong into trouble while you stand back and wait. You will soon find right moments to intervene and pick up the pieces. You do not deliberately slow time down to live longer or to take more pleasure in the moment, but the better to play the game of power. First, when your mind is uncluttered by constant emergencies, you will see further into the future. Second, you will be able to resist the baits that people dangle in front of you, and will keep yourself from becoming another impatient sucker. Third, you will have more room to be flexible. Opportunities will inevitably arise that you had not expected and would have missed had you forced the pace. Fourth, you will not move from one deal to the next without completing the first one. To build your power's foundation can take years. Make sure that foundation is secure. Do not be a flash in the pan. Success that is built up slowly and surely is the only kind that lasts. Forced time. The trick in forcing time is to upset the timing of others, to make them hurry, to make them wait, to make them abandon their own pace, to distort their perception of time. By upsetting the timing of your opponent while you stay patient, you open up time for yourself, which is half the game. Making people wait is a powerful way of forcing time, as long as they do not figure out what you are up to. You control the clock. They linger in limbo and rapidly come unglued, opening up opportunities for you to strike. The opposite effect is equally powerful. You make your opponents hurry, start off your dealings with them slowly, then suddenly apply pressure, making them feel that everything is happening at once. People who lack the time to think will make mistakes, so set their deadlines for them. This was the technique Machiavelli admired in Cesare Borgia, who, during negotiations, would suddenly press vehemently for a decision, upsetting his opponent's timing and patience. For who would dare make Cesare wait? In time. You can play the game with the utmost artistry, waiting patiently for the right moment, putting your competitors off their form by messing with their timing. But it won't mean a thing unless you do the right thing. Do not be one of those people who look like paragons of patience, but are actually just afraid to bring things to a close. Patience is work, unless combined with a willingness to fall ruthlessly when your opponent is about to lose. You can wait as long as necessary for the conclusion to come, but when it comes, it must come quickly. Use speed to paralyze your opponent, cover up any mistakes you might make, and impress people with your aura of authority and finality. With the patience of a snake charmer, you draw the snake out with calm and steady movement. Once the snake is out, would you dangle your foot above its deadly head? There is never a good reason to allow the slightest hitch in your endgame. Your mastery of timing can really only be judged by how you work with end time. How you quickly change the
Yeah, I'm gonna end it right here. I'm probably gonna finish this up later.